Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Tillage Edge with me, Shay Phelan. In this week's episode, I'm going to discuss winter oilseed rape as an option for tillage farmers with Ciaran Collins, Teagasc Crops Specialist. I first asked Ciaran, how are crops doing this year?
Winter oilseed rape, Shay, I suppose it could be considered a good year. I think a good few growers have hit that kind of 2 tonne per acre target this year at reasonable moistures. I suppose a little bit like the cereal harvest, there are variations throughout the country, but I think rape wasn't as affected by that drought maybe in April and May. And I think most growers of winter oilseed rape this year would be quite happy with the yields that they got,
Yeah, and I suppose it's one of those years where oilseed rape seems to have outperformed other crops. And are there any other benefits out there, Ciaran, that growers should be aware of for the likes of break crops, likes of winter oilseed rape, that over, say, tillage or cereal crops?
Yeah, I suppose I think it has a massive role to play in an overall rotation. We do a Teagasc harvest report every year, and it's no coincidence that the higher yields, especially in the likes of winter wheat, and winter wheat is our most profitable cereal crop, and a lot of those higher yields tend to come after break crops, and rape is an especially good break crop there, And look, in addition, I suppose soil improvements, it's a deep rooting plant. And also, I suppose, in the context of, the EU Green Deal, Farm to Fork and integrated pest management, where we're trying to reduce the amount of pesticides and fertilizer used, a good break crop, any great break crop, but especially the likes of oilseed rape, certainly does help to lower that disease pressure over what you might have with continuous cereals, and maybe lead to an overall reduction of pesticides and fertilizer as well,
Yeah, and I suppose it's one of those crops that it seems to have hit a plateau in the last couple of years. Roughly speaking, what area is growing, or do you know what's the size of the industry, and what are the main uses of oilseed rape in Ireland?
Yeah, I suppose in around 8,500 hectares is where the area has sort of stabilised at. It was a bit higher there at one stage. I suppose you have a kind of a cohort of very committed growers at this stage. But I think there is big scope, in the system to increase that from 8,500 hectares, given the benefits that rape provides as a break crop, I suppose in terms of the industry and the structure itself, a lot of what we produce is actually exported, and that's mainly due to the lack of crushing capacity in Ireland. I suppose the market itself for oilseed rape is quite diverse. A lot of it is used for meal. It ends up for meal, for animal feed. Some oil for biodiesel, and there are some maybe kind of niche and specialized markets then. And I suppose the one that's sort of capturing the limelight a little bit now is the food grade oil, that we use for cooking and that. Now it's still a very small market, but it's certainly something that's increasing, and it's something that we can do in Ireland very, very well, and it's probably a growing market, I suppose,
Yeah, and there are health benefits, I believe, for the crushed cold pressed oilseed rape over other vegetable oils as well. So it's certainly a market that could be tapped into a bit more. All right. In terms of sowing, Ciaran, I know most growers are busy at the moment with the harvest, but is there an ideal time for sowing, and are there differences between establishment rates, and maybe how can guys get the work done when they're at probably the busiest time of the year?
Yeah, I suppose that is the difficulty sometimes with rape, especially if the harvest runs late. I suppose ideally we want to get rape sown in the month of August, and I suppose there are a few reasons for that. I suppose getting it in the month of August, or certainly maybe the latest early September, timely sowing is crucial really for good establishment, and the good establishment is essential for high yields really, because one of the major pests that we tend to have are the likes of slugs and pigeons, especially in the spring, and late sowing, you just don't get that canopy development in time, and you tend to get a lot more, especially the likes of pigeon grazing, and I suppose so also well-established crop, certainly from a weed competition point of view as well, is beneficial. So ideally getting that crop in before the end of August, maybe a little bit of leeway for growers further south.
And Ciaran, is there any differences between how guys establish them between plough-based systems or direct drill systems?
Yeah, well, there's research that was done at Oak Park on the crop establishment trials show that whether it's plough-based, min-till, strip-till, or including the subsoiler leg systems, that they were all actually capable of giving high yields. So I suppose the plough system is probably most reliable, but all systems in those trials were capable of delivering high yields. In terms of row widths, they went as far as 500, 600 millimeters, and it didn't hinder the yield potential. But I suppose the advice always, especially in the likes of strip till systems, is maybe to increase that seed rate by 10 to 15%, especially when you're using wider rows.
Yeah, and I suppose they do provide a very quick and a quick way of getting the crop into the ground when guys are busy. In terms of varieties, Ciaran, I see the department have published their recommended list in the last week or 10 days. What should a guy be looking out for when they look at the department recommended list?
Yeah, I suppose from my own perspective, I mean, the first thing is to look at the recommended list. Varieties that are on the recommended list, they've been grown in Ireland for a minimum of 3 years in Irish conditions. So, a grower can satisfy him or herself that, this variety is suitable for Ireland. I suppose it happens a little bit with all crops, but I suppose we rape a little bit more so at times where a variety might do well in the UK, tried in Ireland for one season, doesn't do well, and then you're left with the cost of that. So I think really concentrating on the recommended list is the key area there. And in terms of technology, I think I remember when I suppose I would have been looking at rape first, pod shedding of grains at harvest, was a huge worry. Lodging was certainly a huge concern, but in fairness to the breeders, there's been very good advances in breeding technology in recent years. And, we've now varieties with excellent pod shatter resistance, disease resistance is increasing, and we also have good turnip virus yellow resistance in some varieties as well. So I suppose overall you're looking for a combination of all of those traits, but I suppose the one, if I was to single out one trait in terms of disease resistance, it would be light leaf spot. That's a crucial one and can be a big yield robber if it gets going there in the early part of the spring.
Yeah, so growers shouldn't just be looking at the top line, which is the relative yield, in terms of using that to select their varieties. It's all the other characteristics really that they should be taking into account as well, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Top line yield is fine, but if you're in a situation of high disease pressure, or lodging, I suppose, is another one as well to mention. You need those things right. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of seed rate, Ciaran, I mean, there's hybrids and there's conventionals on the recommended list. Is there a difference in terms of seeding rate for those
Yeah.
varieties?
Work done by Teagasc now, it's quite a few years old now, but would have shown that there wouldn't have been a huge difference between conventional and hybrids. But having said that, your seeding rate, I suppose, number one, depends on your soil conditions, but we'll just assume that soil conditions are reasonably good in August. So you're looking at a range of maybe 50 to 80 seeds, with the conventional varieties at the higher end of that. Now, most of the seed companies will pack the seeds in bags. So it might be a 5 hectare pack or a 3 hectare pack or that. So that's normally a good guide anyway, but normally in that range of 50 to 80 seeds per square meter.
And we were mentioned earlier on as well, I mean, about the workload that guys have at this time of the year. And one of the things that sometimes can put guys off growing oilseed rape is the fact that they have to go and spray it almost as soon as they sow it for herbicides or with herbicides. Are these essential now, pre-emergent herbicides, are they necessary anymore, or should guys be using them?
Yeah, well, I suppose there are post-emergent options, and in fairness, there are much better post-emergence options now than there would have been a few years ago. So, a lot of growers have, opted for that. And you mentioned earlier on about the pressure during a busy harvest, and I suppose that's another job that has to be done. I suppose ideally, herbicide choice generally obviously depends on the weeds that are present. Pre-emerge is ideal if you can do it, but there are good post-emergence opportunities. And I suppose it is important maybe to say in terms of the preems, it needs to be on before the seed chits, and as well, just to avoid heavy rainfall after application as well. So they're two crucial pieces of the pre-emerge scene.
Yeah, one interesting piece of technology that I've seen has become popular in the last couple of years, this whole area of clearfield varieties. You might just explain what are clearfield varieties and why might growers consider using them?
Yeah, it's a very useful technology. So clearfield varieties, they're hybrid varieties first of all, and they're generally grown in where you might have difficult weed situations where brassicas are present. Okay, so if you've got brassicas, obviously it's very difficult to control those, especially volunteer rape or maybe the likes of raunch. We do have a herbicide called salsa, which does give good control of charlock. A lot of growers have successfully used that, but you might have hedge mustard, raunch, some of those volunteer rape. So clearfield varieties can be used in this situation, and they're sprayed with a specific herbicide called Cloranda, and that will control brassica weeds within the crop. And I suppose it's important, the clearfield varieties, they can be recognized by the letter CL in the name, and I suppose that's just important in terms of getting the herbicide right afterwards as well.
So am I right in saying then that if a guy wasn't sure of what variety he has to look and look at the CL at the end of the name of the variety. Otherwise, if he uses that Clearanda herbicide on conventional rape, he could be in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the Cloranda is specifically just for the clearfield varieties, which are denoted by the CL at the end of the name. Now, I suppose they're probably not for everybody, but they're very, very useful in a situation. It may open up a field that wouldn't have been suitable for oilseed rape up to now because of a brassica weed problem. So they are very useful in that situation.
And do they yield and perform as well as conventional variety or normal variety, shall we say?
I suppose they tend to be slightly lower yielding. Now, I suppose that's part of the breeding technology and a little bit of a lag there. So I suppose they generally will be, a little bit of a lag in terms of yield with the conventional varieties there. But if you have a field that you've got a brassica problem, well, the clearfield variety in that situation will probably out yield the conventional. So I suppose it's horses for courses, really.
Exactly. And in terms of fertilizer, Ciaran, some guys use starter fertilizers, more guys don't. What's your opinion on using fertilizer at sowing time?
I suppose the first thing is to make sure the pH is right. Ideally, you're looking for 6.5 or a little bit higher. So above 6.5, that would be the starting point. P and K can be applied in the autumn, or some people will wait for till the spring. So maybe 1020 or that is often used. Nitrogen, generally speaking, there's normally, and especially in a year like this, there's probably enough nitrogen in the soil for the oilseed rape plant. But having said that, winter oilseed rape is very efficient at utilizing nitrogen. So the likes of organic manures might have a role there. So pig, cattle slurry, poultry litter would be very useful there. And as I said, brassicas are very efficient at using that nitrogen and maybe helping to build that canopy. And I suppose the organic manures might be very useful as well if the crop was sown slightly later as well. So that bit of nitrogen may be a help in that situation.
And one of the reasons why, if we look at British media, why oilseed rape area has declined in the UK is the problem with cabbage stem flea beetle. Is it much of a problem in Ireland, and how would guys recognise it?
It hasn't to date. No, we haven't had a huge problem. And I suppose in terms of in terms of the UK, I mean, sometimes the problem can be so severe the farmer hardly ever gets to see the crop. I mean, the population is so high that they literally take it as it's coming up. As I say, in Ireland, or 8,500 hectares, we haven't had that issue yet. And I suppose it may be something that we might see down the road, but also it opens up an opportunity because the amount of rape that's been grown in the UK, our nearest neighbour, has decreased. So as I said at the start, some of our rape is exported, so it may create some markets for our oilseed rape as well.
And how will guys recognise it if they suspect it in a crop?
Little shot holing in the leaves is generally the giveaway symptom. The little beetle, you'll see them hopping around. They generally hop from plant to plant, but little shot holing in the leaves would be the symptom.
And I suppose finally, and probably most pertinently, In terms of profitability, you mentioned it earlier on. Is it on its own, and it's one of the problems, I suppose, with a lot of break crops, is oilseed rape, winter oilseed rape, a profitable crop to grow for farmers, do you think?
Yeah, I suppose the perception out there is that it isn't, but when target yields are met, I mean, it's actually more profitable than spring feed barley. You know, that's from our own Teagasc cost and returns that we do every year. So, you know, in that context, and spring barley is the biggest crop, most widely grown crop that's grown in the country. But I think you also have to factor in, you know, the succeeding crops. You know, winter wheat is our most profitable crop, and the highest yields of winter wheat come after good break crops like oilseed rape. So I don't think, while it can stand on its own on a single year, but I think the profitability, you know, has to be viewed over the duration of the rotation. And I think another, you know, positive for oilseed rape is most merchants that buy oilseed rape will offer a forward price, you know. So there's great comfort in, you know, you mightn't even be finished this year's harvest and you could have the start of next year's harvest in the ground, guaranteed price, you know, a willing buyer. So that's a good help with those contracts there. And I suppose finally the price, I mean, we've seen huge fluctuations in cereal price from year to year, but in fairness, in recent years, the oilseed rape price has remained relatively consistent and probably less variable than cereals overall.
Okay, and I think that's the point. We do have to look at the profitability over a couple of years with the crop. Listen, thanks for that, Ciaran. That's brilliant.
You're welcome, Shay.
That's it for this week's episode of the Tillage Edge podcast, and thanks to Ciaran Collins for joining me on the show. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Apple Podcast or Spotify so you never miss a show. For more farming information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Shay Phelan. Thank you for listening, and our podcast will be back again next week with more tillage news and advice.